Followed by Senator McIntyre. Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Kay. If I understand your last answer correctly, there is a whole grading, if you will, from zero tolerance up to 5 nanograms, and the relative impairment that you referred to. So this is been an experiment for many states or several states over the last few years, if I understand correctly. So my question for you is, looking at your experience, and this is a question for Mr. Wood as well, rather, you talked about some 30 lab tests that were carried out, or experiments that were carried out in Quebec. How can you compare the results that you have with drivers who had used some cannabis rather than alcohol or other drugs? What can you tell us about the results of the studies that you've already carried out? Because I understand that you're proposing a research program, but you're saying that you've already carried out some 30 studies in Quebec. And what do you already know from the studies that you've already carried out at this point?
So far have been only a small number of them have focused on the cognitive effects. So a lot of the research we do is focused on the safety aspect, as well as giving the information of how quickly you absorb the drug, how quickly you eliminate it, so you know how to do the treatments. In terms of the studies we've done that we have looked at cognition, it's only been a small number, so we don't have currently sufficient data to give the answer, which is why we would like to go beyond that and do actually on the driving simulators, be able to do the studies using those simulators to collect the data that we think is needed.
Parce que si je comprends bien, vous nous dites que
Because if I understand correctly, you're saying that there is a lack of scientific data. What I'm trying to understand is that how did other jurisdictions set out very specific numbers, but either zero tolerance or 2 to 5 nanograms, and the concept of relative impairment? How did they come to those conclusions?
How they came to the 5 nanogram threshold. I know that that's been used by many of my colleagues in their research. I think that if you look at what occurs pharmacologically, if you smoke cannabis, you get rapid levels within the first 10 minutes, as you've heard, no doubt. And then over the course of an hour, that drops by 90% to a lower level. So people are within that 1 to 10. So that would help us narrow down our answer as well, is that people know that by the time that they get to the point of testing and collecting a sample, that they're in that 1 to 10 range. I think the other thing is, in terms of a reliable detectable level, I think people were limited at one point to about 1. Now you're much lower than that. So I think part of it was based on laboratory science. Another part was based upon what did the samples show by the time people actually collected those samples. The sampling is so critically important as to when you obtain that sample.
Monsieur Wood, est-ce que vous voulez...
Mr. Wood, would you like to add something?
They base it off of. I mean, there's really good publications. One using a driving simulator at University of Iowa. It's probably the most realistic simulator there is. And in their publication, they said around 8.5 nanograms per ml is equal to 0.05 BAC, and I think it was around 12 nanograms is equal to 0.08. So I mean that, which is probably one of the best publications, because using an actual simulator and actually collecting blood, a lot of other, instead of collecting, they've given someone a dose of cannabis, either smoked it or ingested it, and then just assume that the dose, everyone's going to have the same blood levels. The thing is, that's not, what we've done with smoked cannabis, the difference is huge. We have people who can't inhale at all and don't really get any exposure, and then we have other people who, a few puffs, and they get a huge exposure. So it's been very hard to review the literature and really compare it. The best study there is out there suggests that it is quite a bit higher than the 2
even
and 5.
That best study, just to add, looked at 18 subjects. 18 people. And what they found, very small, what they found was an effect on weaving, but not even an effect on leaving the lane. So lane excursions was not affected.
Okay.
They found an effect on speed, but in fact, the effect on speed was not that they were going faster, they were driving slower. And so they basically came away with one of their interpretations was that people with cannabis had an awareness of being high and were trying to compensate for that by slowing down. They knew their reaction times weren't as rapid, so they slowed down their driving.
Merci.
Sénateur, Monsieur